Hello and welcome to another Coffee with Developers. I'm here with Ryan J. Salva, who I actually met in another company, but you're now in Google. So what are you doing there?
What am I doing there? So I'm building developer tools, same as I've done for now, Lord have mercy, 2.5 decades. So I've been here at Google for a little bit under a year, where I'm responsible for leading product teams, building developer tools and services. So everything from like the DevOps side of the house, with like cloud build and deploy, observability, so cloud logging and monitoring. But I would say a huge part of my job is building AI assistive tools. So Gemini Code Assist, effectively tools to help developers with code authoring, as well as Gemini Cloud Assist, so effectively helping developers with all of their ops. So things like troubleshooting live site incidents, or designing and deploying infrastructure, or doing cost optimization with the help of AI.
Well, let's go take a step back a bit and like just list a few of these ideas. Like, I mean, we are in a big bubble and hype about AI, and everybody says like everybody can be a developer, and like everybody's super productive about it. So what kind of ways do you see that AI helps developers, and what kind of developers do benefit from these different ways?
I mean, it's quite diverse.
Yeah.
So it's just about as diverse as there are different developers and different application types. I'll say a few things. So maybe first here, a lot of what I see developers doing here is using AI. Like the easy one is predictive text. They're using AI just to like save a couple of keystrokes. I don't know about you, but my fingers get a little sore after a few hours of typing. So it's really just thinking ahead of them. Then they're using conversational AI chat often to help understand code. Just ask questions. Hey, what's this function doing? What are some ways that I might be able to make this class more resilient, or this API call more resilient? Increasingly, we see a lot of developers practicing, I don't know, dare I say it, vibe coding, effectively providing relatively simple natural language prompts, and then using that to build out anywhere from simple prototypes to more sophisticated applications that usually is from greenfield. That is to say, usually from scratch. But occasionally is in the context of existing kind of large, robust applications. And maybe last, if I kind of do this on a click stop from simplicity to complexity, is I see a lot of folks experimenting with using AI for automation. So this often gets headlined as agentic or agents, right? And there are lots of different varieties of these, but it can be everything from using AI to help with a large migration. You're going Java 8 to 21, or you're using AI to maybe help you write your internal engineering documentation by pointing it at a repository and saying, hey, go compose all the documentation on my behalf, to, I don't know, performing code reviews on your behalf to kind of critique the code that the human wrote. And kind of on this continuum, I would say, developers are using it in practically every language for practically every application type, from mobile apps to big, robust enterprise applications. More than anything, though, I think that developers today, both new and seasoned, old guys like you and me, well, I'll speak for myself, seasoned old guys like myself, a lot of times they're doing it because it's fun to play with. Like, it's fun to have new toys in part of our stack. And so long as we're doing it and actually enjoying the act of coding and we're happy with the results, then it makes the job all that better.
One weird thing I see in this, there seems to be this fetish for like making developers more productive. And we've done it in
Yeah.
the past, of course, with other tools as well. I mean, in essence, the first AI coding helpers were IntelliSense on steroids.
Yeah.
Like it did the extra bits for you. I'm kind of worried about the documentation bit, because I always found like the documentation should actually not just describe what the code does, but actually give the instructions how to install it and these kind of things. So it feels like we're generating a lot of stuff with AI, And then we're actually going through it and deleting it again. And I always found the biggest joy in development is deleting old code and unnecessary code. But with like a vibe coding environment, like there's a lot of npm packages being pulled that I would have never used, for example. So do you think there is an in-between step right now where we just amass a lot of stuff and then we start thinking about it more in like, let's write a spec first and then let the spec generate the code rather than just like, oh, look, I can do 1,000 lines of code with just one prompt.
Wow. Wow. There's so much inside of that. And by the way, you're pulling on all the right threads and I agree with you. Maybe I'll start with hey, vibe coding produces just a bunch of code and we may not necessarily want all of that cruft kind of sticking around in an application that we intend to maintain for a long time, right? I think here your observation is spot on. The state of the models today, especially when the prompt is, I'll call it underspecified. It's a very light prompt. Build me an arcade game Tetris app, right? Just to use a silly example here for a second, right? That's a one-liner prompt, and it may generate many files, many directories, many different dependencies. I think that is helpful for a particular stage of development. There are times at which we just want to prove out an idea. We just want to prototype something real quick, see if the software, the user interface, or the particular kind of API is something that we would find useful. And then we don't intend to maintain it. We actually just want to test out the idea, and then we intend to tear it all down, refactor it, restructure it, and build something that will be long-term maintainable. I think that is a completely viable use case. Again, whether you are, a student hobbyist or you are a professional developer. And also, one thing that maybe some of the data is starting to tell us is that there are some consequences to not paying attention to the code that is being written, right? So, Chris, you're familiar with the DORA report, right? So been around for over a decade now, effectively just kind of assesses engineering practices and culture. This last year, the DORA report had a special part of their survey and part of their analysis on the impact of AI on software engineering. Not surprising, it's in the zeitgeist, as it were. And one of the findings that they had was that adoption of AI as part of, again, the coding practice correlates with a regression in delivery stability. Very specifically here, a 7.2% regression in delivery stability. When we say delivery stability here, what we mean are things like you deploy it and there's an immediate failure. It goes into production and automatically things go wrong, right? And that's clearly bad. We do not want that. That does mean that ultimately we're producing software of lower quality. And I think there are a number of possible hypotheses behind this. The DORA report doesn't actually say why things happen. It just say that this is happening. But clearly one of the possibilities here is that folks are writing more and more code, and they're not necessarily evaluating, assessing, placing critical judgment on the architectural kind of soundness of that code. And it's resulting in failures. And so I think that in a lot of ways, this is about, you pointed this out at kind of the beginning there, the way that we've approached AI for the last roughly 5 years. It's largely been a tool for helping developers go faster, write more code. And I have long been of the opinion that the kind of the software development industry, it's kind of a fashion industry, right? We've all got the, 1 year bell bottoms are in fashion, the next year skinny jeans are in fashion, but eventually bell bottoms are going to come back around again, right? I think that we're kind of at another moment where the software engineering kind of hype cycle and trend cycle is going to start to swing back a little bit. We've been focusing on velocity. We've been focusing on efficiency. 2025 is going to be the year that we as engineers have got to start focusing more on writing better code, not just more code. And I do believe that AI has a role to play here. You kind of picked on documentation there, so I'll use that one as an example here. One of the things that we know is that organizations that have documentation for their code base are 2.5 times more likely to hit their reliability targets. Now that's probably a fairly easy one to guess why that is. If you take the time to write out your definition of good and take the time to write out how you expect the application to be architected, then your team is more likely to hit that standard. Everyone's got a shared understanding at that point. Now, if you can use AI then to help write that documentation, I'm not saying here independently without any kind of human in the loop participation, but if your AI can help reflect back, here's what the code base does today, and then your people can go back and reflect back, oh, what it does today is not what we want it, what it should be. And so they can then hopefully both assess where they've got architectural challenges in their code base, as well as accelerate the time to write that documentation. I don't know about you, I would much rather be writing code than I would docs. I personally enjoy writing code more. And so I think this is a good place where AI can help. I'll give one more example. Let's talk about tech debt for a second, right? Every single one of us who's spent any time maintaining applications over time end up in a state where we're behind on taking library SDK updates. We end up, we move on to other projects and we stay at Java v14, right? Is the rest of the world has moved along. When we've got old versions of our code base, like we're missing important security patches. We're missing bug fixes. We're missing new capabilities that might be in there. And this is a place where I do think that AI can actually help an awful lot. Like the migration from one version of an SDK or a library to another often is a lot of, there's a lot of just like changing function names or changing simple syntax things. This is a place where I really believe that AI can help us go back and erase and eliminate some of that tech debt responsibly, and not just using the AI necessarily to help us go faster, but actually to kind of eliminate all of that tech debt.
One issue I find with that is that especially when you take like free models, or when you take things that are basically rudimentary or your own local hosted models, they're kind of outdated. It takes time to weigh, and it takes time to actually pack these models up to create them. So when you have a fast-moving environment, great example is React that just changed a lot of their architecture. So basically, rewriting those is a thing that a lot of people have to do by hand, and a free model out there basically will not know that this change happened in the last month. They will still give you like the best results from Stack Overflow 4 years ago, rather than like what's going on now. So I think for newer stuff, this will be really tricky. What is one way that we can mitigate that?
Yeah, so I'll say, so I've now been building AI assistive tools for 5 years. So I helped build the first versions of GitHub Copilot, even though I now today work on the Google side of things with Gemini Code Assist. And I'll say that early on, that was definitely the case, that we would often get information that was 18 months or more out of date, because again, it just took a long time to train the models. And also, I have seen that situation improve an awful lot in the base models, whether it is Gemini or Claude or OpenAI or any of them today. And so like they are getting better at that. And also, there still is the problem of an update that happens yesterday. They're just not going to know about the update that happened yesterday, or at least the foundational model will not know about the update that happened yesterday. So there are a few techniques that can get used and do get used to help with that. So the first of them is just, everyone who's listening probably knows about this. You use some version of RAG and prompt engineering in order to refer back to either relevant documentation or code samples that reflect back the new versions of things. And so you might easily here want to point to the updated React documentation to say, hey, in your prompt, here is the actual documentation for the way that this particular component should be written, right? And by the way, essentially all of the methodologies are variations of this. It is, how do we overload the prompt with the syntax to imitate, or the architectural pattern to imitate, to override any of the kind of the probabilities that are baked into the foundational model. So you can do it through RAG. In our case, we do it through a thing that we call search RAG. So effectively what we're doing here is we make use of, well, what Google's probably best known for, Google search, right? And we effectively use Google search to go out and search the documentation for the most recent version of, in this case, let's use React as our example. For the most recent version of the React documentation, we ingest that into our prompt, and then that gets married with whatever context is in the local IDE that you're working with, right? I'll say here that probably the interesting thing to note about this is that I've talked to developers before who, I don't know, are crazy masochists and want to spend their time writing their own programming languages. And it's a fun exercise, academic, and who knows, sometimes it results in the next new hotness, right? And using large language models to help author code in their new programming language, right? In fact, I was talking to a developer, I guess now it's probably last year, so it's a little while ago, but not that long ago. And they were writing a language that I'll say had syntactic similarities to Go, but was not Go itself. And they used a large language model, a coding assistant directly in the IDE with their new programming language. And we're actually pretty surprised that when it returned back syntax, not in a new file, but in an existing code base, that it did return back syntactically correct code for that programming language. Mm-hmm. And this is because fundamentally the models, they're great imitators, right? Really, like what they're trying to do is imitate the cadence of the syntax that's around them. And so overloading that prompt can be really, really effective in helping you get kind of the shape of the syntax, the semantics that you want to write.
So one thing that I always wanted to have, which always drove me nuts in every company I worked at, we always thought like there should be a code standard, like how to write code in a certain way in a certain language. And it never worked out. Like you came up with the thing, you had to enforce it. The only place where it actually is interesting is in the source control. So actually you have no like trailing line endings that actually would make a difference. That is not a difference, or these kind of things. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to see a code assist to basically just look over the shoulder of the whole team for like a month, find out what the commonalities are in code, in their code style, and then create a code standard from that. That actually gets applied to it automatically before it goes into version controlling. I haven't seen that in action yet, but I would say that would be such a great thing where a lot of companies are wasting their time trying to force their engineers to write code in a certain fashion that the machine could do for them with a tap autocomplete.
I'm so with you. I've worked with so many, you can call them platform engineering teams, dev infra teams, DX teams. It's kind of all the same thing, right? You've got some core team who's defining best patterns and practices and architectural patterns. And then they spend that's probably the first couple months that they're on the job. And then they spend the rest of their year trying to police the rest of the team and cajole them into writing things like I'm going to put this in scare quotes, the right way, right? And the fundamental problem here, you pointed this out, it's like the only thing that we really have in order to convince developers to write things according to that pattern, it's people and processes, right? I mean, it's maybe you do some training, you do some kind of like workshop with your team to say, hey, here's how we do things. You try to write it down into documentation. You try to put maybe your senior architects and engineers on code reviews to slap developers' hands every time they do it slightly the wrong way. Linters, kind of help, but like linters are a little bit constrained kind of in their ability to at least to enforce architectural patterns as opposed to merely syntactic preferences, right?
And there's always this backlash from the community. I remember when JS Lint came out, and then somebody did JS Hint, which is slightly less brutal about it. And
Yes.
I worked with Douglas Crockford back then at Yahoo, and there was nothing more strict than him. And it's just like the amount of arguments that month and month we wasted about this. And you're like, well, if a semicolon goes at the end of the line, I finish a sentence with a full stop. Why is this hurting you so much? Why do you actually think to have to do these things? So I think that's why code assistants, to just automate that away, would be really helpful for us.
So let me tell you, I'm giving you now what we're working on today. So anyone who's listening to this in the future, that is to say, let's call it like the latter half of 2025, go download it. Those of you listening to it today, sign up for the preview. But so one of the things we're doing with that is, all right, here's the deal. I talked about using your senior engineers to go and like slap developers' hands during code review, right? So effectively what's happening there is every time you do a code review, your team is providing some kind of like passing human feedback, human judgment, and saying, hey, here's the way that we prefer to do things around here. I don't know. We prefer to have a semicolon at the end of the line. But more importantly, hey, we actually have a library that we use for handling this type of function. You should go use that library rather than writing custom code yourself here. That'd be a good example. Every time that feedback in a code review results in an actual code change in the PR or MR, depending upon your ecosystem there, like that's your platform engineering team describing what they want people to create and how they want you to architect the applications. So what we do is we install an app in GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, wherever you're at, and we monitor those code reviews, obviously with all the right permissions in place, and choose your security model here. And then what we do is we take that advice and we effectively put it into a semantic index so that as you're using the tools to write code, to author code, we have the benefit of all of this tribal knowledge, all these cultural preferences that have been expressed in code reviews. We can marry that with the model and the prompt, so that as the tools are writing code on your behalf or suggesting code, they can do it not just in the generic way that the world writes TypeScript or the way that the world writes Python, but they can do it in a way that is bespoke and relevant to the way that your team does it, not just how your team does it, but how your team does it in the context of that particular repository or application. Because I can guarantee you, we all have different definitions of good for each repository that we work on. Some of them are going to be mobile apps, some of them are going to be web apps, some of them are going to be, play toys that we're kind of tinkering around with, playgrounds.
Yeah, it's an interesting bit to see what this, when you said about this tribe knowledge, my favorite of that was PHP. Like the documentation was never where you found it, but the comments on the documentation where all the goodies were.
Seriously, that was the best documentation ever.
Yeah. And this is where of course we wonder then, like, how do you index that and how do you tell people that you index that? As you said before, my favorite was, I've blogged since 2006, and it always was for me a scratch pad. Like when I found out something, I wrote it down and for myself, and people liked it as well. Then 12 years later, I Googled something and I found my own blog because I forgot about how I've done it. Now, with Google search going away and getting into like a chat AI kind of thingy, that makes me wonder, like, where is the transparency there? Like, where do I know where this result comes from? Or let's turn it around. Like, we all indexed a Stack Overflow. And as every senior engineer knows, the first answer on Stack Overflow is not the correct one, but the fourth or the fifth one is. The first one is the one that gives you the fastest result that might not actually be maintainable or good, but it's the easiest to understand it. So it's the one that explains the how, but not the why.
Yep. Yeah.
So how do we get transparency on where solutions were coming from a code assist?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to give a today answer, and then I'm maybe going to pontificate, as it were, about where things are going in the future, because I don't know that the today answer is the same thing as the 5 years from now future, or 5 years from now answer, right? I think the today answer, and this is, I think folks see this all the time, and anytime you're using a conversational AI chat tool, you get the little footnotes that kind of like cite the kind of the grounded source for a particular summarized bit. And so, whether you're using, let's say, just use the Gemini app today, or you use Code Assist, it gives back an answer, and then there's an annotation that takes you back to either maybe it's a source that was pulled from search, maybe it's a source that was pulled from your internal repositories or your company's internal code base. And in fact, kind of we do this all the time today, both in our chat window as well as in our log. There's references back to, hey, here are the primary sources that most heavily influence this. I think that's actually helpful both from improving confidence and trust in the tool perspective, as well as sometimes for debugging, right? Just like, hey, I kind of want to know where this answer was pulled from. Heck, sometimes you may even want to pull on that thread long enough because you want to actually go, hey, find that this was pulled from, this answer was pulled from a library somewhere. And rather than actually effectively copy pasting or kind of importing similar code into your own library, you just want to go take a dependency that otherwise you would not have known about, right? Mm-hmm. And also, as we cast ahead by several years, one thing I definitely am seeing, and this kind of gets back to our earlier conversation, is that AI is writing more and more and more code. And that does mean that over time, I think that developers' ability to review every line of code is going to weaken. Like we're not going to have the time or the capacity to review it, much in the same way that today we're all working in intermediate languages, like a C# or Java or any of these others compile down in the end to ones and zeros. And we never review the ones and zeros. And so there will eventually come a point at which we care less about the individual lines of code and more about kind of some abstracted layer that we're working at, whatever that abstraction looks like. And so the job of referring back to sources will be more one that's about asking the models to explain their solution and to explain, like, why do you believe that this is the right solution? And, what gives you confidence as a model in this particular solution? I'll actually take a moment here, if you'll allow me to kind of give an observation. I've just started seeing this, by the way, in the wild. It's kind of started to kind of give signal within the last month or two. And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. I was talking to a product manager over, the guy who leads product over at Jellyfish the other day. So Jellyfish, for anyone who's not familiar with it, does kind of like analytics and observability on top of engineering systems. And one of the things we were noticing is that developers increasingly are spending less time coding because AI is helping them go faster. Great. The tools are in some way doing their job. Yay us. And also the amount of time spent writing requirements, effectively think of them as natural language prompts, is dramatically increasing. So even as we're spending less time writing Python, TypeScript, Java, Rust, Clojure, whatever, we are spending a lot more time really thinking about what it is that we want to create and expressing it in natural language. Now, there's a few things that I think are happening here. One, that maybe proves out the prior point that over time we'll spend less time looking at the lines of code and more time thinking about the requirements and writing in natural language. That's a trend that I think is easy to see to kind of play out over multiple years. Two, I think that it means that we're maybe not, in terms of software delivery, saving quite as much time as we think that we are. I suspect what was actually happening here is that developers were actually writing the requirements and sorting through kind of the reasoning as they were writing the code. And so now a lot of that preparation work is just shifted to a new language, in other words, natural language. And then the last thing that I'll note about this is it is also changing the job of the developer to function a lot more like, I don't know, what I would maybe traditionally have thought of as being an architect's role, to really take, big complex problems, break them down to their component constituent parts, figure out maybe the contracts between those components, anticipate failure cases. And this is doing a couple of things. I mean, yes, it's changing some of the skill sets that we need, or at least changing the way that we apply those skill sets. But it's also because we're removing the language barrier. That is to say, we no longer need to know the syntax of Rust or the syntax of, Python. But we're inviting more folks to, essentially approach the problem solving coming with their own native language. And I think this will have a couple of effects. Like one, obviously, we're going to invite more people into kind of the act of creativity that is software development. Hopefully, that's going to allow us to build and do an awful lot more because we have more people. We were democratizing software development to some degree. And so now the product manager can at least participate in the conversation in a way that they were not previously able to, or the designer will be able to participate in that software development conversation in a way they were not previously able to. In the end, this is in some a good thing, but it really does change our definition of what a developer is over the course of the next 5-10 years. And it means that we'll come full circle now to your first point about, hey, how does this impact the quality of the applications that we're delivering? And are we really suffering from a lot of hype at the expense of, a mountain of technical debt? It's going to mean that as we're inviting all those new people to participate in the process, that our job as the engineers of today is really going to be to think about, how do we start to deploy these tools responsibly? How do we help to train all the new people who are coming in and participating in software development? And how do we build the safety nets that allow us to continue moving on? We cannot do that if we just focus on faster. We've got to focus on, how do we use AI to write better code?
I think there's a few things in there. And 2 years ago, I gave a keynote about this where I said, like, the role of a junior developer is kind of gone. We learned these skills by assessing technology and writing specifications that actually have the knowledge of former failure in them, because we actually wrote a lot of code as junior developers. You write a lot of code. The more code you write, the higher up in the hierarchy you go, the less code you write. You sit in meetings and you look at other people's PowerPoints and these kind of things instead. And you actually you do code reviews for other people. So a lot of people started saying that. I think Simon Willison had a good point when he said, like, AI assistants are like the weird intern that learned the book by heart, but he didn't understand what the implications of the different syntactic ideas and different models are. And another person said that 2 days ago, again, in another meeting with me, where it's like, it feels like we're throwing code into a room of junior developers, like waterfall style, to the AI agents, and then have to spend more time reviewing it. Now, becoming a software reviewer was a skill set that took some time.
Sure.
But now we're taking that opportunity of learning away from developers because we want them to hit the ground running much faster. So it might be that we're just holding on to things that are not necessary any longer. But if we just generate code with AI, isn't there also a danger of repeating the same things over and over again? We're not actually changing new structures in code. We're just taking the best answer that was used 5 years ago in that large company, and that might not apply to your use case.
Yeah.
So isn't there a chance that we're actually outdating faster than we do by moving faster?
I'll give an anecdote to maybe illustrate my point here. So I've got a 17-year-old niece. I'm going to go to her graduation here in just 2 weeks. She's going to graduate from high school and go to UT Austin to get her computer science degree. She has become a marvelous developer, especially for someone of age 17. And in large part, she's become a great developer because she has grown up with coding assistants. I mean, and an amazing uncle, but mostly because she's grown up with coding assistants. She uses coding assistants to help her understand how the code works. She uses it to explore different solutions. She uses it to ask questions about why does this work? Why does this not work? What would some better implementations of this be? The coding assistant really can be a sounding board and a coach and a teacher and a tool for exploring one's curiosity. And so, yeah, you're right. Like if we just passively build me the Tetris game and then, go home and spend the rest of our time scrolling Instagram, sure, yeah. We're not going to build those skills. But if we use AI as a tool for indulging our curiosity and understanding problems, we are going to build those same skills, and we'll still build that intimacy of domain knowledge. The trick here is that we have to have faith in our colleagues and ourselves, and kind of maybe demand of ourselves that we actually understand kind of the tools and the things that we're building. So yeah, there's the opportunity for us to get real lazy, and for us to just never actually understand the systems that we're working with. I guess I just have more faith in developers and in people that their curiosity will drive them to use the tools for learning.
I love that, and I would love to see more headlines like that. I mean, not like, oh, company so and so has 60% of their code automated, and company so and so has 40% of it automated. I would love to hear more like company so and so made their developers 10 times more effective because they actually can review the code without actually having to call in a meeting with the whole team in there. But you can do it with an AI assistant on your own machine, and if you want to.
Let me give you that number then. I'm going to give you a number, right? So within our team, so we of course we use the tools that we build, right? We use part of that is measuring the impact. And so one of the things that we found is that within our teams, when the developers are using AI assistants, they are 20% more likely to achieve whatever task it was that they were kind of going after. Now, that means we're actually 20% more effective as an organization with, I'll qualify this metric to make sure it's clear, without looking for outside assistance. So independently, a developer is 20% more likely to achieve their task, complete their task, their coding task. And then that saves time because they don't necessarily need to go out and ask a senior engineer how to do something, or they don't need to explore in some different way. Like, these are tools for learning. These fundamentally are tools for learning. Yes, and going faster. Yes, and hopefully writing better code. But what I hope for is that it allows us to clear up more of our backlog, to be able to expand the number of subjects that we can become experts in, because we don't necessarily need to be quite as mired in all of the if then else switch case statements. We can be thinking a little bit more about, hey, what is the architecture of the thing that I'm trying to create? What is the actual end user experience that I'm trying to create? And by that, I don't mean necessarily the design, the pixels. I mean, genuinely, what is the end user experience of the software?
One thing that's coming really fast towards the next few years, and this year already as well, is that a lot of developers that worked in the 50s and 60s and 70s basically are now going to be retired, which means we're going to have a lot of Fortran, COBOL, and all kind of other really outdated systems. And let's not kid ourselves, most banks still have something like that in production.
Oh,
like
yeah.
we basically think like that's a joke, but there can't be, but it is. So And when you just said like you go out of your comfort zone, and I found that an interesting way of actually using assisted code as well to learn about enterprise and like legacy code bases and how to optimize those, or even how to shift them to another language. I think by hand, this was never something that a company would invest money in because it takes too much. But with an LLM or like a codex running on it, it basically is an opportunity to finally get rid of those, basically real issues that we have in the real world. I jokingly told people, if you want to be a freelancer right now, learn COBOL, because they're going to pay you whatever just to keep those things running. But I hope that AI and a code-assisted AI will actually help with that problem as well, because there's a lot of legacy code that we accumulated over the last 40 years that is not going away anytime soon.
100%. We actually just a couple of weeks ago released two tools specifically to help with that. One to help with the actual, the migration modernization piece of it. And by the way, it's usually not just a, translate from COBOL to Java. As you know, there's usually a complete re-architecture that has to happen as part of that, because there's not a one-to-one mapping. So it's a true modernization. But there's another piece of it as well. Remember our conversation from a moment ago about a lot of the work shifting from the code writing to the requirement gathering and the requirement definition. The same thing is actually true with the migration modernization project. There's a lot of work that goes into assessing, okay, for this giant COBOL application that frankly only 2 or 3 people in my organization know how it works, right? How do I go make sense of the sequencing that will allow us to make this a successful migration project? And so there's a large bit of work that has to happen before you ever even write your first line of code about analyzing what's your dependency chain, how are your services connected and related to each other, where is there actually code that is being hit on the, every millisecond versus code that is maybe on the periphery of your application's edges. And that can help build out that project plan. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work to do here. I think I'm probably quoted in more than a couple of articles out there on the interwebs about being on a vendetta to eliminate COBOL from our planet. I think, not that there's anything inherently bad with it, but I do think that we've moved on as an industry, nay, as humanity, and are ready for kind of a little bit more modern language.
I want to talk a bit about being able to shoot yourself in the foot with AI. There's a lot of things out there that I keep seeing where people were leaking their own API codes because they actually didn't put it in an end file, but they put it in their source code. I mean, at one time you used any code assistant and you said like var AWS key equals, and it would give you an AWS key that somebody else put on their GitHub repo and got indexed months ago or years ago. And especially with the agentic web that we're going for right now, I'm kind of worried about this. I mean, there's slop squatting is the first thing that's happening right now, where the LLM starts hallucinates dependency package names. And these package names are created by malware creators to actually make sure that they get pulled in, so you don't even see it. So oftentimes a vibe coded generated environment pulls in dozens and dozens of packages that don't get looked at, or that might actually be malware and you don't know about it. And I think that's a bit of a worrying aspect there, because we're not generating images or videos. I don't care about that. But we're generating applications, and having worked in application security for years, every single thing can be an attack vector. And especially when it's outdated best practices from 5 years ago on Stack Overflow. So how can we make sure that we're not actually accelerating or making our developers so efficient that they're actually not realizing that they're creating malware anymore?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few pieces of this, but I think probably the most important one is that we have not yet obviated the need for static analysis tools, like security scanning tools. Like, just because an application is generated by AI doesn't mean, as you point out, and this may be a bit obtuse, but like clearly it's not by default always going to produce a perfectly secure application. And that may be because there are kind of failures in the way that the application, the logic is written, or to your point, it may be bringing in a malware package. And so that makes it all the more important for us to use a sneak or something like that in order to scan for obvious vulnerabilities or known vulnerabilities in CVEs, right? Beyond that, I do think that there are some other challenges that we still have to grapple with from an overall tool chain perspective. Like a lot of the excitement from the last, maybe 4 or 5 months or so has been around MCP servers, right? And the ability to invoke tools, a wide variety, constellation of different tools to connect out to different data sources so that the agents then can go make use of those tools into it. That's another, for what it's worth, a potential vulnerability point, because you're opening up your software development to a wide variety of tools that you may not fully know or understand. And because you're essentially opening up to those other tools, you don't necessarily always understand the security profile of those tools as well. And so I think that, by the way, MCP by itself doesn't do anything to address things like RBAC or kind of access to data. It's essentially a problem as of yet unsolved by at least that particular technology. A lot of the next, I'd say 18 months or so, I think are going to be the industry figuring out how to grapple with the security and access controls of the AI tool chain. Because what AI is fundamentally used for, it's an information aggregator and summarizer, right? What it's really, really good at is going out and getting data from a lot of different sources and translating it, summarizing it into something that's maybe tailor-made for a particular question that you asked for, right? And that means that it's both hungry for data and knows nothing about the permissions or the security profile of that data. And this means that all of the existing safety nets, I talked about security scanning, but like also test coverage of just like, unit testing, integration testing, manual testing, all of that work becomes all that much more important. And frankly, I think why software development is maybe at this moment uniquely suited for kind of large language models and AI assistants, because it is a domain where we have so many built-in safety nets. We may not always be good at using them. That is to say, we may not responsibly create the amount of test coverage that we should have, but we know how to do it. And if we can then use AI to increase things like our test coverage, or to actually ensure that every PR or MR gets a code review, that's going to overall elevate our overall confidence. And I think we need to spend more time as tool makers investing in those scenarios.
There's also an access thing that fascinates me when you can say headlines like, "Oh, Gemini can now read your screen and actually install things on on the operating system level." And I'm like, excellent. That's what every malware always wanted to do its whole life cycle. And now we're just giving it away. Like, it feels like chmodding 777, our home directory for the whole thing. It feels like sometimes we're trading off convenience for like worrying level of access to a degree. Like it's a UX problem to a degree. How do we make sure that people know what the machine is doing for them? And when I hear other companies saying like, "Oh, we're going to have agents now that will go shopping for you online from TikTok with your credit card," and I'm like, again, that's every pickpocket's dream out there now on an automated level.
I'll tell you, one of the ways that we solve that is by effectively putting the dev environment inside of a VM that is entirely controlled. And so, what you do there is, you don't necessarily put anything in the VM that you don't want the LLM to have access to. And so they're entirely cloud hosted dev environments. And in this way, that at the very least, I own the VM, I own the cloud hosted dev environment, I can determine exactly what is and is not allowed to be in that environment. And this allows you to kind of lock down essentially everything that the LLM has access to, in addition to any of the other kind of namespacing that you put around the tools that are accessible through the MCP or whatever other protocol that you happen to be using. So I agree. There's a lot that we need to be thinking about in terms of security and locking down. That doesn't mean we should necessarily stop using the tools. It just means that we need to do it inside of the right boundaries that allow us to kind of like operate safely. That's true for anything else, right? It's, we still have houses. We just put locks on them. That's same kind of thing.
One thing I always found fascinating as well is that when it comes to when I worked on Edge and in VS Code, I put the Edge developer tools inside VS Code because context switching was always seen as the biggest killer of coder productivity. We get our editor and we spend months and months making the perfect font with the ligatures and everything, setting up everything the way we want to. Now I get the feeling that every company that is in the AI development space now brings out their own editor and actually asks us to use that one. Yeah. I never got into Visual Studio or I never got into Xcode because I like my lightweight editors with plugins.
Yeah.
Do you think why is that every company is building their own clone of VS Code with something around it?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I think it's a few things. Like one, AI has given folks just a reason to think about changing up their dev environment. And like VS Code has not always been top of the charts. There was Sublime Text or Dreamweaver way back in the day. Again, it's a fashion industry. We all kind of go through our cycles here. One of the challenges here is really that VS Code has limited the extensibility points that are available inside of VS Code, so that there are some things you just cannot do as an integrator working inside of VS Code. So, when you hit in GitHub Copilot, I think it's a Command K if I remember correctly, you get the little inline chat window. You can't do that if you're not Microsoft. They don't open up that extensibility point. I use that as an example. Mm-hmm. And so what we're finding is that a lot of other tool makers are like, listen, there are extensibility points that we need to have access to and we want to have access to that just don't allow us to create the developer experiences that we want to be able to create. And so we find them forking VS Code. And one of the wonderful things is that VS Code is it's a well-architected IDE, and it can be, when you don't overload it with a gajillion different plugins, it can be very, very lightweight and fast and snappy. That team is really, really, really good at what they do. And also, I think that a lot of folks are thinking about what happens as the IDE becomes less and less and less of our overall work week as engineers. We talked earlier about requirement gathering and definition in natural language starting to take it out an outsized portion of the time. Increasingly, what we are seeing is that developers, maybe today you call it vibe coding, and it's short natural language prompt results in multi-file batch change, and then you compile and get the vibe as to whether or not it works or not. Increasingly, it's going to be you give specification or you give prompt and you go away and the agent works on a long-running batch job, and then you eventually come back and review the code and get the vibe as to whether or not it worked. The actual way that we think about development and the tools that we want to use are likely going to change. I think that everyone who's trying to, make sense of the technology and how it can be used to express, frankly, in my case, human creativity. That's really what I think an awful lot about, is how do we allow people to go be creative inside of these? They want the ability to actually change the developer experience. And VS Code was made for a very particular developer experience that was 10 fingers on the keyboard, going through, build and, hot reload and all that other kind of stuff. It may be that the developer experience of tomorrow actually needs a different window. It needs a different extensibility model. It needs a different set of patterns. And whether you are Gemini Code Assist or Cursor or Windsurf or Roo or C-Line or any of these others that are out there, everyone's kind of wants the autonomy to be able to experiment with new patterns. And if you're beholden to the IDE of the last decade, it's kind of hard to go and break out of that and imagine what a new developer experience might look like. So this is a moment of change for the industry. It really is. Hopefully that amounts to a moment of a lot of creativity and exploration. It does mean that we're in for a bit of a wild ride of a transition. But I think that's great. I think that's a good thing. We need to actually try on a different fitting pair of pants, to continue my fashion analogy here for a second, every once in a while, just to spark our imaginations and spark those creative juices once again.
Cool. Well, yeah, that was inspiring enough to finish on, I think. We are already at the hour to a degree, and we always want to keep these a bit short, but I would love to talk more. We can sort something out more to do some, especially, I guess you're busy with I/O preparations now as well.
We are. Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot announced there, I assume.
Yeah. Will you be there by any chance, Chris?
I'm going to be on vacation. I'm going to be I'm not coming this year. I've been several times. It was always a good time, and it's always quite fascinating to see how much is announced and how much is released, and and where 2 years later we think where things are going. But what I always loved about I/O was that every part of Google showed off different things. There was like a music department that showed like music things with HTML5 back then when that was a thing. There was like the editor environment, the Google Cloud people, and I also realized your fashion choice, that you had your rag to wear with the rag.
There you go. Spot on.
Well, it was great meeting you. Well, if you had one thing out there to people to, when somebody is now starting a company and thinking about like, I want to think about developer productivity and AI, what would be a thing where you say like, we don't have enough people thinking about yet? What would be a thing where we need to push more effort in, not just build the next editor that allows you to vibe code stuff?
I'll say I believe this from the bottom of my heart. We as an industry have talked about DevOps 15 years now, and really when we were talking about DevOps, we were almost always talking about the dev side and not the ops side. The same is true with AI as well. Everyone's been focused on the IDE and the code generation. Ops is the next frontier of AI. There are so many problems to be solved for operations. You got to be able to sort through logs and better understand, help folks recover from live site incidents or rollback deployments. There's lots that needs to be done to help folks sort through kind of designing infrastructure. There's lots to be sorted out really around hey, how do we actually make sense of a bill of materials and map this back to kind of identities deeper on down in the supply chain? There's so much there. So anyone out there who's either bootstrapping themselves or they've got an angel investor waiting in the wings, go think about how you can apply AI to ops. That is an virtually untapped market at this stage.
That was Ryan J. Salva from Google. I send you back to the wonderful start of the day in your case. It's getting dark here now. So it was great meeting you again. Good luck with I/O and good luck with the things that you do. And I'm going to be taking a look at what you're creating and see if it applies to me as well. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that was Coffee with Developers with Ryan J. Salva. If you have any comments, please leave them here. We're going to be sending them on. And there's going to be more coming soon. So hopefully you will have seen this in the newsletter. Subscribe to that one if you haven't done that yet, because we have videos like that every week here. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.